Well, good morning. It is good to see all of you. I hope you enjoyed a week of good weather, and it's just good to be together worshiping again today. Last week you got to hear the plans and the details for some of the changes in our services that we have coming up in just 2 short weeks now. We're going to be moving our evening classes from 6 p.m. in the evening to 9:30 in the morning. We'll be doing that for about 45 minutes, having 15 minutes of fellowship and connection time, and then we'll be starting our morning worship service at 10:30 in the morning, lasting till about 11:30, 11:45, depending on how long I want to go on that day. It should be easy enough for you to still beat the Baptist to KFC and everything, but I kid. But that should, if you haven't heard the announcements, we announced it last week. We announced it on a Sunday night a couple weeks ago. We've been trying to plug it as we can, but obviously we don't want anybody showing up and not having the memo or missing out. But, the idea is to invite you all to both a time of deep intellectual and spiritual study, followed up by an inspiring worship and time of praise, all in one service in the morning. I don't think it's too much to ask. We're asking you to come a half hour early and stay a half hour later than we've been asking you to for the last decade or so. And when we remember that this is the Lord's Day to begin with, right, a half hour before and a half hour after is not too much. But the reason that we're making these changes in the first place is because as a church, as Christians, we want to create space for all of you to have the opportunity and time for Christian learning, for spiritual growth, and relational investment. I'll say that again. We want you to have an opportunity and a time for Christian learning, spiritual growth, and relational investment on top of what we do in the morning. And so we're setting aside every Sunday evening moving forward and inviting you to join us in homes across the city, in homes all over the city, so that we can do that very thing, have a personalized time of spiritual growth and Christian friendship within our church. And I use all these big words and these colorful descriptions for what you might call small groups, right? Or life groups, or I'm still rooting for roots, right? We're going to call it roots, but I'm young and trendy, and I understand not everybody is, and that's okay. But I kid. Regardless of your connotation with that word, with those words, small groups, life groups, or whatever, regardless of what connotations you may have with that, I really am. I am so excited to see how we can pursue God, how we can pursue being a church through that unique attempt of growing together and worshiping God together on Sunday evenings moving forward. And so this month, with that kind of looming on the horizon, 2 weeks from today, we're working through lessons on the blessings that we can receive through those small groups. And I guess I really want to be clear. I was thinking about this last week after I got done preaching. I want to be clear. I am not preaching the gospel of small groups, okay? I'm not up here to proclaim the good news of small groups. I'm a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? And every Sunday that I'm up here behind this pulpit, I am determined that my time here be spent pointing us to God, pointing us on how to live a faithful life as His disciples. And so that's what we're going to be doing. And I want you to know that is my motivation here, very clearly. I want us to look at the principles of faith that we will be exercising and growing towards through our time in small group, okay? The message isn't small groups. That's not the gospel. That's not the point. That's not the message. It's about the areas of growth that we will be working on through small groups. Small groups is just a method. It's just a means to get towards faithfulness, discipleship, fellowship, and everything that we believe the Scriptures teaches us to have. Things like, these are the things we're going to be learning about: deep Christian community. That's what we talked about last week and what we're going to continue talking about today. Deep Christian community. Next week we'll look at the biblical model for church. What is church supposed to look like? What did the first century Christians do when they met as the church? And then on our first Sunday with the new format, we'll talk about the need for spiritual growth, cultivating spaces for spiritual maturity. And that's going to be the sermons you're going to get over the next couple weeks. And today, like I said, I want us to continue the conversation we started last week. Last week, we looked at how lonely and isolated the world has gotten, based off of an actual advisory report by the U.S. Attorney General, that's a different thing. Surgeon General. Yeah, there's too much news going on these days. Surgeon General. Yeah, that in our communities, there's an actual increase in physical health problems related to people's loss of connection with others. We talked about how we were designed by a Trinitarian relational God, and thus we were meant to live and exist in relationship with others. That our goal in forming these small groups is set to emulate all of that, to seek out the desire of God that we be deeply connected as His family, as the family of God. And so I say all that, I remind you of last week, because I think it was probably very easy to leave the service last week and think to yourself, but doesn't our regular church services already do that? Doesn't our regular church worship services on Sunday morning already do that? Don't we already catch up with each other throughout the Sunday morning gathering? Don't we hear about each other's needs through the announcements? Don't we pray for each other here? Don't we develop connections and relationships while we meet? And I'd answer that, I sure hope so. I do. I hope that is happening here when we gather on Sunday mornings. I hope that you're meeting people here. I hope that you're growing closer to one another before, during, and after our worship services. I pray that you're investing in these relationships, that in your time here you're caring for one another, praying for one another, and so on. So yes, I think to a degree our assembly does offer those things. But my question, and what I'm trying to present last week and this week is that happening at the level God wants it to be happening at? Is that happening at the level that God desires for us? What's a tent for? And I know that feels like a hard left turn in the conversation, but I just need you to trust me for a second. What is a tent for? Yeah, you saw it popped up, right? My clicker skills are not great this morning. Yeah, shelter. One, it keeps you out of the elements, right? Keeps you dry from the rain. It protects you from the strong winds. Protects you from a strong sun, right? When you're out in the weather and you're isolated out in the wilderness, it covers you from those elements, from the weather. Secondly, it shelters you and protects you from the animals that are out there, right? To a degree, okay? Bears, coyotes, raccoons, snakes. It might just be a little piece of polyester. But when I go to sleep and I turn out the lights and I am not conscious anymore, it's nice knowing that there's a little something between me and whatever is out there in the woods, right? It's just a little bit of separation and protection from something that might be crawling over my sleeping bag in the middle of the night. 3, it gives you a clean space too. If you're out on a trip, I used to do a lot of backpacking hiking trips in college. We were pretty close to the Smokies down in Nashville. I really enjoyed going out there and staying multiple days in a row. And when you are out in the woods and in the mountains for 3 days, you are not clean anymore, okay? Your boots will not be clean for a while. But you can take off the boots, you can leave the backpack behind, you can shed that outer layer, get into your tent and have just one isolated clean space. You won't have all the pine needles stuck on your food. You can get out your food, you can get out the next day's clothes, your socks can be a little cleaner. And it's just a spot where you can kind of just have that separation and cleanliness from whatever is out there. And lastly, I think for a tent, it offers a bit of comfort, doesn't it? I mean, that's kind of a basic one. With a tent, you're not directly on the sticks and on the rocks. With a tent, you have a bit of a controlled environment. In fact, when it gets real cold, a tent itself is going to kind of insulate you a little bit. Not a lot, but it's going to let some of the heat stay around where you are and relax you and help you rest. And so, these are the different reasons we use a tent. We camp. Maybe it's been a while for you, but if you've forgotten this, it's not hard, right? This is why we use a tent. So, my question is, why do you need this? Why do you need this? Why do you need a sleeping bag? Because if you ask me, from a bird's eye view, everything you're getting from this is right there, right? It's a little bit of a shelter. It just kind of gives you a little bit of a space. Well, we said a tent does that. Well, I don't want no creepy crawlies climbing on me when I'm asleep, I want to be able to be wrapped up clear to my neck. Well, we said a tent kind of keeps everything out, don't we? Well, I want to be warm. I want to be comforted. Well, didn't we say a tent already does that, right? They kind of offer the same objectives. They do sort of the same things. But one of them is a bit more form-fitting. One of them is a bit more intimate. One of them offers it at a what'd you say, extreme, at a higher level, right? If this is to provide you comfort, this is to provide you a lot more comfort. If this is to provide you with some protection, this gives you at least a little bit more protection, right? if this provides you with shelter and protection from the elements, this is doing it at an even higher level. And I just want to say, I see a real correlation between this and Christians, the church, and a small community of Christian friends, okay? A closer gathering of people who are seeking out God together at a more intimate, contextualized, personal level. What this gives us, what a closer group of Christians can provide you and should provide you, is a more intimate, personalized, accessible spiritual experience. More so than just simply attending a large gathering of Christians, a large church service. The same way that a sleeping bag would fit you, warm you, and comfort you more tightly than a tent would. If your experience of Christian community, if your input of Christian community consists of sitting among 150 people for 1 hour a week, you're going to find yourself spiritually cold, right? You're going to find yourself a bit more vulnerable to Satan's attacks. We need a closer group of Christian connection, of Christian friendship, of Christian community and relationship if we're going to be well equipped for our life as through hikers in this world, right? If we're going to go through this life and we want to be well equipped and we want to be spiritually thriving instead of spiritually cold, vulnerable, or suffering, we've got to have it. We've got to have them both. Yeah, because ironically, our modern world has seen an influx of people who have cast off the tent and kept the sleeping bag, if you're going to follow my metaphor here, right? They waved goodbye to the gathered, assembled church and decided that they only need a small group of Christian friends. And that's not going to cut it either, right? That's not going to cut it either. I actually tried to address this. I was thinking back as I was writing this. It was last September. Coincidentally, it was last September I did a 6-part series called Assembled. I think we're gathered. We talked about what it means to be the gathered, assembled church on Sunday morning and how vital that is to a Christian faith and how nearly miraculous what we're doing right now is in our life and how important it is to have an active life within a church family and attend these gatherings on the first day of the week. It's so important. But now, a year later, here we are needing to address the other side, the other needs. We need this connection. We need that close, intimate, personal relationship to help us reach our spiritual potential. It's both and. Do we see this? The tent, the sleeping bag, the large gathering, and the close Christian community. It's both and, not either or. And originally, the church had both of these. The church had both of these. I'm trying not to step on my toes. Next week, you already saw that I'm talking about biblical models for church. But the first century church existed as house church. Or what we might call small groups. And I love this quick little snapshot of it in Acts chapter 2. Speaking of the early church, Luke writes, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. So there's the large picture, right? They sold property and possessions to give anyone who had need. Goodness. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. There's a small group, right? And ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. At some point in our history, we traded couches for pews. And I think we're worse off for it. At some point in our history, we traded couches for pews, and I think we're worse off for it because it turns out it's hard to feel like a family when your only connection with each other comes over lobbies and parking lots, right? You can't feel like a family when I just stare at the back of your head for an hour a week. We can't do this in just lobbies and parking lots. In fact, there was a Christian study I read a couple years ago, and I looked it back up, that talked about how it takes, on average, 7 minutes for a conversation to get past the superficial and into the potential meat of a conversation. To get past the Reds have a playoff spot, which they do, in case you didn't know, right? To get past the weather and to get into the how are you doing? What is truly going on in your life? Tell me about who you are. To get into the genuine intimacy of a conversation takes on average 7 minutes. And we're not going to get there too often when we're trying to get our ties off and get to Chipotle for lunch, right? It's hard to do in these spaces. And I hope you kind of see what I'm trying to say here. I'm not trying to dismantle the goodness of what happens here, because it is beautiful and wonderful on its own. Obviously, what happens in the gathered people of God on Sunday mornings is extremely important, and I keep trying to say that because I don't want you to hear the opposite of what I'm saying. But I will say it's not enough. If this is it, if this is all you've got, it's not enough. Your soul needs more. Your soul needs more. We've talked before about the basic human need to be known and to be loved. Earlier this year, I preached that very sermon that we all need and we desire deep down to be known and to be loved. We have that desire. Now, of course, God fulfills that at the greatest level for us, Psalm 139. If you need to hear that today, read Psalm 139. But He's also invited us to share in that responsibility to know each other, to help other people feel like they belong, to help other people feel known and seen, to help them feel loved, right? God is doing that. And if you're struggling, like you don't feel like you're known, you don't feel like you're loved, like trust that God does at the deepest level know you and love you regardless. But He's invited us to help other people see that reality and truth in themselves, to share in that responsibility, so that, and I'll say it again, we can be a family. That's what it means to be a family, right? The people who know you most and hopefully love you most is your family. And we have to, it doesn't just happen organically. We have to create space for that to happen. And look, not just for us, but for the sake of the world too, right? Not just for us, though we need that, but for the sake of the world. We heard last week how the world is feeling lonelier and more isolated than ever. So what better way to reach those people, to address that need, than to plant half a dozen welcoming, hospitable spaces all over our city and invite people to come, to belong, to be loved, and to hear the good news? What better way to address that major issue in our communities than to create half a dozen hospitable, welcoming spaces all over the city and invite them to come and be known and to be loved and to belong and to hear the good news? I think that's the kind of missional effort Paul would be all over today, right? That's the kind of thing Paul would be all about. You know, it fills our spiritual needs. We as a family, I think we need this, but it's a huge opportunity to reach the world around us as well. It's internal and it's external. It's inward, it's outward, and it's upward, right? And that's kind of what we try to aim to do here. And to that point, I like watching old Andy Griffith episodes. I haven't done it recently, but when Lorelai was a baby, man, we watched like 3 episodes before taking her to school, daycare, you know, every single day. I just enjoy good old Andy Griffith. Maybe it's something about preaching here, because Todd did too, right? You got something about the pulpit just draws you to black and white films. But something I have noticed through watching those shows, as well as other older movies, they utilize their front porch a whole lot more than we do, don't they? You look back to Annie, and like maybe some of you remember this, that culture utilized their front porch a whole lot more than we do. In the past, people spent a lot of time on their front porch welcoming the interactions and the conversations and the relationships of the people passing by. But now, we're a back porch kind of society, aren't we? We're a back porch kind of society. And we put up big privacy fences around those back porches too, so we don't have to have any interaction with anybody at all. And you know what? Like, I like my privacy. I don't have a privacy fence, but I wish I did. Okay, like I like my privacy. I love a quiet, uninterrupted evening at home with just me and my family. And that's a spiritual need as well, for that self-care and that oneness. But that has to be balanced with what I'm going to call a front porch culture, okay? It's got to have a balance, right? You know, a front porch culture that initiates and experiences community, you know, that welcomes others, that we need that as well as being on our own and caring for ourselves. There has to be that balance there. And there's really not a balance anymore. We're an isolated people. You know, we don't walk by each other's front porches. We drive by them in our soundproof cars with our radios blasting whatever we want, with our headphones in at the grocery store. We have completely eliminated all potential for that relationship and togetherness. And so that's what we're wanting to do, to open doors, invite people in to sit with and be with each other in the name of Jesus. Okay, this isn't just some social experiment because we think you need more friends, okay? We're doing this in the name of Jesus so that you might live, as the scriptures put it, so that we might live. And man, I think this is going to open up some incredible doors. I think this is going to open up some incredible doors. I truly believe that God loves to act in unexpected ways. He shows that all the time, right? And if we leave room for God to show up and do wonderful things in our midst, I believe that he will. As long as we give him the space, if we don't overstructure our lives, and we gather together on a Sunday night and leave a little bit of room, God's going to show up and do some pretty cool stuff in those places. I mean, how many wonderful blessings from God will we find in this time that is focused and yet also open, right? And that's what those small group conversations hopefully will be. They'll be focused, but they'll also be pretty open as well. And how will God show up and bless us as we do that every single week? You know, if we just gather together as Christians and let him lead our conversations and lead our thoughts and participate in this spirit-filled atmosphere, I don't see how that doesn't bear fruit, okay? I don't see how that doesn't bear a ton of fruit and blessing for us as a church family. Now, that's going to open up a treasure chest of blessings for us. And not to kind of hop from different thought to different thought, but speaking of opportunities, you know, opportunity to share our faith, opportunity to let God move. Another key element here, another opportunity that we're going to have through these times is to bear one another's burdens. That's something else we need to find space for. Galatians 6:2. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. How many people sit in these pews every week, hurting and quietly suffering, but never going to speak up, never willing to share that pain with their brother or sister who's sitting 18 inches to their left? How often does that happen? And look, I get that not everyone is going to come forward asking for prayers. I get that people are more private and they're not going to call, you know, me and Lisa throughout the week and ask for something to be added to the bulletin. And that's okay. Like, I understand that. Everybody is different. But we still want to hear what's going on in your life. We still want opportunities to pray for you. If you're that person this morning who's hurting, who's suffering quietly, you know, we're your family and you have needs. We want to intercede to God on your behalf, that you would be made well. And hopefully, my hope is, and my prayer is that as trust and as relationships build over the weeks of small group meetings, that each and every person here would have a close-knit group of Christian friends that they know and love and trust, and that they can open up to and receive that spiritual support that they need. That's what I'm hoping this does. And if that's not a biblical principle, I don't know what is, right? I'm hoping that we will provide everybody here a time and a space and relationships to open up and get the spiritual care that they need from one another. And if that only happens one time in one group, man, it will be completely worth it. It will be completely worth it. And it's not just the struggles that are going quietly and unnoticed every single week. You know, there is so much wisdom and strength and love sitting in these pews. I love getting to be a part of church leadership because I get to know people at different levels, and it's hard to get for any average person to get to know 150 plus people. I get to know these people. You guys have sponsored me to do that for a living, and I love that. And I know that there is unmatched wisdom and talent and strength in these pews that are not able to fill the slots on a Sunday morning, the limited slots for communion, prayer, song leading, and I kind of take one of them every week, right? You know, we don't get opportunities for each and every one of those people who have so much to offer to share that. And I don't want that wisdom, I don't want that strength and those talents to be wasted. I want to make sure that each and every one of you have a place to share what you have to offer. You know, your wisdom, your strength, your thoughts, to be known and to be loved and to be cared for within your church family. And that's what we're hoping to do. That's what we're hoping to do. And that's what I believe the Bible points us to try to do. And so I am so excited that we're creating the space to do this on a weekly basis. And I hope that you are too. And I hope that your heart is open that you have eyes to see and ears to hear, and that you're willing to kind of step out in faith so that you might grow, so that I might grow, so that I might be fed by you as much as we are fed and supported by each other. I'm so excited about the close-knit Christian community that God is moving for us here in this church. And I ask that you would participate in that as well. And so this morning, even though our conversation has not necessarily been about how each and every person might receive salvation, we still want to offer an invitation, okay? If you're here this morning and you've been suffering in the world, if you've been out in the dark, if you feel like you've been alone, man, there is a family of God, and we'd love to have you included in that this morning. We invite you to take hold of that through baptism. You just need to come forward as we stand and as we sing.